nice to come home to 3UZ.
And that was the call sign that echoed from the top of Burke Street in the golden days of radio, when the greater 3UZ certainly was the greater. Among the staff and the personalities behind the microphone up there at the top of Burke Street was one Norman Ellis in the early days, and we welcome him to Remember When tonight. Good evening, Norman.
This is the greater 3UZ Melbourne from the top end of Burke Street, 45 Burke Street, Melbourne. G'day, Bruce. How are you?
Let's go down the dial, Norman. What was 3DB's?
3DB was under us. I can't give it their free.
3DB, 3OK, the Herald Sun station.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I see.
Yeah, and what was the call sign of KZ?
KZ, the Brighter Broadcasting Service.
3AW?
Macquarie Broadcasting.
Yes.
And they were at one time the feature station,
That's
although
right.
I understand so were 3XY.
And 3XY was...
The quality station, wasn't it?
Quality station, you're right.
Yeah.
Norman, you were telling me on the phone the other day that in fact your career at 3UZ started before the war back in 1937. Who was on the staff then? Was Tiny Snell doing the breakfast show?
No, Tiny came in a bit later. The fellow named Frank Jenkin was the breakfast announcer. And we had people like Penelope Coffey during the afternoon. I think Rolly Barley had joined then. And when I first joined, Walter Pym came in from 3XY as an announcer. He was brought in as a senior announcer, night announcer and producer, and I was more or less employed as a studio assistant to play the records and sound effects and all that sort of thing for the plays and drama features that they put on. And they put on quite a few.
Norman, my earliest recollections of radio were with Nicky and Graham, and I, as a young bloke about 7 or 8 years of age, was so impressed by that type of radio because it was ad-lib and knockabout, and it was just two blokes chatting, and it was the eavesdropping situation. What were those days like for you?
Well, it was the start of an era. I was a night announcer at that time, and we had by this time what we call turntable operators or record boys. He used to play the recorded advertisements and the music for us, and Graham Kennedy was one of my boys at night. I forget who had the roster, but somehow or other the roster was switched so that when Nicky joined us from 3AW, that he got hold of Graham. Graham was a good turntable operator, and he sat opposite Nick, as they did in those days at the desk, and gradually Nick persuaded Graham to have a word or two. He sort of brought him out. Well, as time went by, Nick saw the potential of this lad, and he brought him on, and gradually, as everybody knows, they became one of the most famous teams and a different type of broadcasting from then on. As a matter of fact, they called it broadcasting in reverse, because the main objective of their advertising was to rubbish the products. Instead of giving it a good build-up, they picked the bad features of it, or the so-called bad features, and criticise. But the sponsors loved it, the public loved it, and away it went, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Norman Ellis, I have a little grab here of Nicky and Graham, and your appearance. You pop into the studio in the morning, and they make mention of it. Now, bear in mind, this is the early 50s. It was a new type of radio, more ad-lib and knockabout. If the phone rang, he answered it, had a chat to somebody, or the cleaning lady would drop in. It was virtually a bit like Hey, Hey, It's Saturday used to be, didn't it?
Get that.
Yeah, well, I've got my sources, Norman.
I see.
But have a listen to this. Nicky Graham and you.
This is the greater 3UZ Melbourne. The time is 11 o'clock.
We've 5 million heads to go before we open the bank at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
Listen, we've got some weather information tucked away someplace.
Yes, we better have that, eh?
And, yeah, it's tucked away, and it comes to you with the compliments of Metro Heat, which is well and truly tucked away now because it's a beautiful day today. But Metro Heat, they claim, will heat a room in 5 minutes. It'll heat first to your carpets, then it'll have
heat a room, heat, H-E-A-T, heat.
Heat a room in 5 minutes. But no, it's perfectly safe even with kiddies round it. They can't get up to any mischief with Metro Heat. How's the temperature?
Oh, that's dashed upon there now. I've forgotten. Oh, in all the confusion.
That's just the line.
Kev, what was it? What did you say, Kev? Control.
54 degrees.
Oh, it's Stan. 54 degrees
And the same forecast.
and the same forecast.
Yeah. Is that all, Jake, now? Let's pick up an hour. There's all those to go before the Commonwealth Bank is open to Santa Claus.
We better have a fairy story, though, really. We'll never get through
that again.
We'll never get through these things.
There's Norman Ellis is going to walk in now and say something absolutely mad. Yes,
Right.
Mr. Ellis, what is it you need?
Good morning.
Good morning. Look, it's nearly afternoon. He wouldn't know.
This is the ABC.
There you are, Norm. A few memories?
I don't recall him putting a thing like that. Oh, maybe that was when I'd left. Oh, I'd been for an audition at the ABC or something stupid.
So did you have much involvement with Nicky and Graham? Were you in things like Ha Ha with Harvest, for example?
Yes. Well, I remember one day Nicky couldn't turn up, and I stood in for him, and I did the whole program in a toffee English voice of that nature, together with Graham, and we got through the whole 2 or 3 hours or whatever it was, and I sort of didn't break down the whole show. Everybody wanted to know who the heck was the new announcer taking Nicky's place. But I didn't have very much to do with the program itself. They were self-contained. They did it very well between them. They didn't need me to interrupt them.
With the popularity of, say, someone like Nicky and Graham, compare them today to, say, Steve Vizard or Ray Martin, who, the public love and come out and meet. Was it much the same with the radio stars of the 50s?
Oh, it was. I mean, radio was it. If you didn't get a mention in Radio Times or the Listener In every week, there was something wrong. I mean, if you didn't provide the information, the publicity to these various publications, they'd make something up. And I've got a sort of a book, a scrapbook in front of me at the moment with some horrible stories that were made up, and it was ridiculous stuff, minute detail of your health and who you were out with last night in a nice sort of a way. But everything an announcer did, breathed, changed his underpants. Everybody in the world knew about it by the press, and we were built up that way and sold to sponsors. We had to meet the sponsors, and fraternise with them and so forth. But we were big time. This was well before television, of course, well before 1956, and people like Roly Barley and Gil Charlesworth and Clem Brown and Walter Pym, and of course Eric Pearce and my old mates from the old Commercial Announcers Club, like Norm Banks, Norman Barmer, Eric Pearce, Eric Welch, Ray Chapman. We used to all get together in what we called the Commercial Announcers Club around about 1942 to 1944, particularly in Ray Connolly's year as Lord Mayor. And this club, we used to meet once a month at places like Menzies, the Australia, Mick Resh's Occidental Hotel, or Mario's or something, and we'd cook something up, usually a ball or something to invite the public along to. And I mean, one of them, when I was secretary of the club, we raised £700 for Food for Britain, for parcels from the general public, by running a ball at the St Kilda Town Hall, a debutante ball, around about 1942.
Norman, while we're talking, about the good old days, and you've got your scrapbooks in front of you, back to Nicky for a moment. What sort of a bloke was he? What sort of a man was Nicky that you knew?
Well, off the air, a very private person. Very private, very quiet, restrained, helpful to a large degree to a lot of people. I know he picked up a lot of talent. He and Nancy Leard together from 3AW picked up a lot of kids, including Bobby Horsfall, people like that. And they used to encourage them. And Nicky ran a series of shows, I think, at a theatre in Northcote. And he introduced these kids to show business. But he was very helpful and patient with them, and he got a lot of good results. But a very quiet, well-living, friendly home man. He didn't like publicity. He wouldn't go to balls or to anything like that.
Explain the appearances that Nicky and Tuppy used to make at the zoo and the showgrounds.
Well, that was before my time, before I met them. Those sort of things went on with the at 3AW with the, what do they call it, the Chatterbox Club, wasn't it?
That's right, Chatterbox Corner.
Chatterbox Corner. Now, I was a fan. This was before, I was only a kid then, before I even joined 3UZ. And everybody was so enthralled with them. They went to the zoo. I remember one time they went to the exhibition buildings, and you couldn't get in the place. There were thousands and thousands of people there just to get a glimpse of them. They were the most popular people of the time.
You told me over the phone, Norman Ellis, our special guest on Remember When, you have fond memories of Tuppy. Tell us more about Fred Tupper.
Tuppy, yes. Well, I first met him. He came to 3UZ after Nick. Nick was still there, but he came as the sporting man. He had his own little office, a very dapper little bloke. He was a beautiful fellow to work with. And he used to run the sporting panel with me. I did the desk work. In other words, I crossed over to Bert Bryant and all the commentators, Tom Moon, people like that, Jack Gurry, and we sat opposite each other. He would do the actual sporting results and things, and I'd do the commercials. But between us, as you know now, we could monitor with 2 pairs of headphones about 3 incoming venues of various sporting events, and we charged through all this. And we had a young kid who played incidental music and helped us out generally, but spent most of his time making cups of tea and coffee and that sort of thing. And Tupp had a terrific appetite while he was working. We used to have a competition to make the best meat roll and bring it in on Saturday about 12 o'clock, and we'd demolish this meat roll by about 6. If we didn't get through the meat roll and a couple of loaves of bread and about 8 or 10 cups of tea, there was something wrong. But all the time, concentrating on what we were doing, and it was pretty cutthroat. We had a lot of opposition from other stations, like AW, of course, and from KZ and from the ABC. But we used to ring up each other. If we missed the result of a race or something like that, we'd ring the ABC. The ABC would ring us. But there was a lot of camaraderie that went on in those days that the public didn't know anything about.
Great memories, Norman Ellis. Thank you so much for sharing them with us tonight on Remember When.
It's very nice to speak to you, and all the best to you and your listeners.
Thank you.
I'm sure so many people will be delighted to hear your voice again, Norman.
Don't forget, fellas, I'm 72 now and been
Are you?
in the business for 7 years.
Good on you. What about giving us the old call sign before we leave you?
This is the greater 3UZ at the top end of Burke Street, Nilsson's Broadcasting Service.
Nice to come home to 3.